Hey everyone, JL here, and welcome back to Bridge the Divide, where I examine irrational beliefs, the irrational behaviors that follow, and how we, with education, rationality, and reason, can bridge the societal divides that they create. Today, we're going to take a look at the channel Apologetics Press. Apologetics Press, or AP, is a non-profit, tax-exempt organization that is dedicated to defending the New Testament. Their videos focus on the existence of God, creationism, the flood, the Bible, and Christian evidences. And yes, when people have to specially categorize their evidence instead of just calling it evidence, that is a huge red flag. This particular AP video features Freed-Hardeman graduate and author Eric Lyons as he explains how atheism implies that life has no meaning. But of course, seeing as how I, and every atheist I know, has meaning in our lives, I'm curious as to how he's going to back this up. Take it away, Eric.
I wonder how many casual atheists have actually thought through the fact that atheism implies that life ultimately is meaningless.
Fitting this guy's last name is Lyons because he's lying about what an atheist is. Moving on. So right out of the gate, Eric is both misrepresenting atheism and lying his ass off to his audience. Because no matter how much he wants it to be, casual atheist is not a thing. People are not casual atheists like they're casual drinkers or casual smokers. People don't throw on an atheist hat before they leave the house and go to a party and hit on your mom, Eric. Also, when Eric uses the term meaning here, what he's actually referring to is purpose. Apologists will often use meaning and purpose interchangeably, as though they were synonymous, but they really aren't. So no, Eric, atheism is just the disbelief in a god or gods. It's the result of rejecting the claims of theism. Atheism would only imply that life is meaningless or purposeless if 1, that for any reason to exist at all for any particular in the universe, a god is required, and 2, that a god's subjectively determined purpose for any particular individual negates that individual's own subjectively determined purpose for themselves. Neither of which is something that can be demonstrated to be true. So one more time for all the seemingly deaf apologists up there in the nosebleed section, atheism and theism speak to belief. You are either an atheist or you are a theist. Or you're an atheist, and the incomprehensible concept of a god isn't even worth a moment of spent energy.
But why?
One of the world's most celebrated atheistic evolutionary writers of the late 20th and early 21st centuries, Dr. Richard Dawkins, confessed that the universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no purpose, nothing, but pitiless indifference.
You know, I'll bet Eric doesn't even realize what he did there. But first, because apologists are so fond of taking things out of context, let's take a closer look at that Dawkins quote. This particular quote was pulled from Richard Dawkins' 1995 science book, River Out of Eden, A Darwinian View of Life. The full quote is, "The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference." When taken without the little edits, we can see that Dawkins was not implicitly stating that life has no purpose or meaning, nor was he stating that there is no God. He was actually concluding that the universe we currently occupy and observe matches what we would expect to see in a universe where the Christian God does not exist. Or, put more simply, the universe we currently occupy and observe lacks the logical entailments of the Christian God existing. And the specific context of this quote was referring to what Dawkins poetically called the utility function of God. Essentially, Dawkins was concluding that a specific, overarching purpose could not be rationally derived from the system we observe. Given the evidence at hand, he could only conclude that indifferent gene selection was responsible for life as it currently exists. And this observation tracks from here on Earth all the way to the cosmos. Also, notice how Eric started this whole video talking about meaning and then slyly equated it to Dawkins' use of purpose.
I fear you're underestimating the sneakiness, sir.
A few years later, Graham Lawton penned a one-page article titled, "What is the Meaning of Life?"
For elucidation, Graham Lawton is a staff writer and columnist for New Scientist. He's also the author of The Origin of Almost Everything. Lawton's 2016 article that Eric is referring to was written for New Scientist as a part of their Metaphysics Special series.
What answer did this leading atheistic evolutionist give?
Eric apparently has no self-awareness at all. That or he doesn't proofread his scripts. And it's obvious he didn't read the article himself, because he'd be a big fat liar if he did. Eric is not only being intellectually dishonest here, but he's also being emotionally manipulative of his audience's indoctrinated bias. By casually labeling Lawton as atheistic and evolutionist, Eric is branding him an enemy to the audience, implying that he can't be trusted, therefore killing any credibility he might have had. Not to mention, he's completely disregarding the fact that the position of atheism and the acceptance of evolution as fact are both a result of critically evaluating evidence with intellectual honesty.
Here was his heavy-hitting first line. The harsh answer is, it has none. Your life may feel like a big deal to you, he wrote, but it's actually a random blip of matter and energy in an uncaring and impersonal universe.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Lawton then goes on to explain that the reality of this is exactly why a belief in a god or gods is so popular. Firstly, because God acts as a sort of buffer against the perceived indifference of the universe. A sort of existential security blanket that imposes objective meaning and purpose where none can be rationally ascertained. And secondly, there's far less personal risk and effort involved when your meaning and purpose are just handed to you instead of working for it.
Other than subjective feelings of meaning and importance, atheism implies we will never get objective data on the matter.
Wait just a second there. First, Eric claims that atheism implies that there is no meaning. Then, he cops to subjective meaning being a thing that exists, which directly contradicts his first statement because subjective meaning is still meaning that exists. Then, he shifts the goalpost to objective meaning, which of course is something that he'll never be able to demonstrate actually exists. I swear, these apologists are more slippery than an eel dipped in Vaseline.
Atheism simply fails to capture a true or higher meaning.
Eric, you just admitted that subjective meaning was a thing. If a person determines what their subjective purpose or meaning is for themselves, then that meaning or purpose is at minimum true to them. Also, under atheism, the highest meaning or purpose one could have is what they determine for themselves. So this statement from Eric is yet another flat-out lie.
In light of such valid but depressing confessions about atheism,
Just over a minute in and we're already at the emotional appeal? Come on, Eric, you gotta wait until at least the third act before you break out your most manipulative weapon.
I would simply like to point out two beautiful truths about theism, and specifically biblical theism.
Ooh, a Christian sales pitch. Okay, Eric, you've got 2 points. Sell me on your God.
First, a person can logically come to know that the God of the Bible exists.
Logic. Awesome. Right in my wheelhouse. You've got me hooked, Eric. Now reel me in.
If matter demands a maker, if life on earth demands a life giver, if complex functional design in the universe demands a designer, and if the supernatural attributes of the Bible demand a supernatural author, then the evidence demands this verdict: the God of the Bible exists.
Oh, 0 fish to the boat, Eric. 1, the Bible is just a book. It doesn't have any supernatural abilities. That's only in the movies. And while it does have stories in it that describe supernatural events, the book itself is just a book. 2, all of the conclusions here are circular in their reasoning. Matter being made, life being given, the universe being designed, and the supernatural events in the Bible being true, all of them require the presupposition that the entity behind all of these events actually exists. And 3, none of what Eric cited was actually evidence. So I guess what Eric really meant when he said logic was logic that's also fallacious. But that's okay, Eric. You've still got 1 point. Bring it home. I'm sure you saved the best for last.
Second, the Word of God gives mankind the meaning and purpose that he inherently longs for.
Oh, Eric, a Bassmaster you are not. But apart from assuming that humans inherently long for meaning and purpose, I do want to thank Eric for confirming the psychological utility that these concepts provide. In a life-threatening situation, like a natural disaster or a car accident, a believing person may pray to their God for help. And studies have shown that prayer, much like meditation, can have psychological and physiological effects on the person. It can focus their thoughts, calm their emotions, and lower their blood pressure, all things that can increase their chances of survival. But just because a belief in a concept has a psychological or physiological utility does not demonstrate that that concept exists in reality.
Please understand, rational Christians do not come to believe in God and in the Bible as the inspired word simply because we want some objective meaning to our life on earth.
But you just said humans inherently long for purpose and meaning. Wait a minute. I think Eric is trying to avoid that whole confirmation bias issue that Christians have when evaluating evidence.
Rather, once we see the evidence for God and His Word and commit our lives to the Lord in obedience to the gospel of Christ, our admittedly innate but formerly uninformed desire for a higher meaning is at that moment made complete by the perfect law of liberty.
We are going to need some heavy dressing for that word salad. Ultimately, everything that he just said there was just begging the question of the existence of God in regards to evidence and the truth of the Bible. Similar to another video that I recently covered, this one wasn't intended for atheists to critically analyze. Eric's video here is solely designed to function as another emotional manipulation of believers. We can determine this because so far the video only focuses on all the things that a believer would supposedly lose if they were to stop believing. It implies they would lose all sense of meaning or purpose, or maybe even hope, if they were to cease believing in their God. We also know this because Eric never actually supplies the evidence that he's referring to. And that's because he's appealing to his audience's subjective determination of what that evidence is, thereby giving them an external justification for their fallacious reasoning and an excuse not to analyze the claim any further.
In fact, God gave His inspired word so that the man of God may be complete.
Still begging the question. Eric has yet to demonstrate exactly how he knows the Bible to be anything more than just another book of antiquity. No different from the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, the Tao, or the Egyptian coffin texts.
No doubt, part of this divinely given, God-revealed perfection or completeness is one's realization that the human life actually has real objective meaning.
If only Socratic dialogues weren't such a mystery to apologists, what a world this could be. If there was an objective meaning, it would exist and apply regardless of God's existence. If God existed, then it would just be appealing to the objective standard of meaning, and its own personal whims would be completely arbitrary. But if no objective standard exists, then any meaning is subjectively determined by God. And Eric, Genesis 6 actually supports the latter position. Because if God exists and is all-knowing, then it knew infallibly before creation that the purpose that it set down for Noah and his family before the flood would be radically different than the purpose set down for everything else on the planet. Essentially, this whole thing is a variation of the Euthyphro dilemma. And while many of you are familiar with this, for those who are new, the Euthyphro dilemma is found in Plato's dialogue Euthyphro. It describes a conversation between Socrates and Euthyphro on piety. The question ultimately presented by Socrates was, is something morally right because God commands it, or does God command it because it is morally right? Depending on how the dilemma is answered, morality is either arbitrary to God's personal desire, or it exists independent of the existence of God. And when faced with this quandary, instead of just accepting its aphoric ending, apologists tend to just throw it out the window.
The best atheism can do is to ask people to choose individually for themselves what the meaning of human life is. But such meaning is entirely subjective.
And I can't think of anything more empowering than teaching someone that they have both the freedom and responsibility to choose their own path, to decide for themselves what their own personal meaning and purpose will be for their lives. It's certainly more empowering than telling them that any purpose or meaning they'll ever have comes from something else. effectively stripping them of not only their freedom, but their identity. In point of fact, that's one of the key attributes often seen in an abusive relationship.
One person could decide that the meaning of life is to eat as much good food and to have as many sex partners as possible.
Hey, if chimichangas and sexy time are all a person desires for their life, then so be it. That's their choice to make.
Another could easily say that the meaning of life is to explore space and to establish a colony on Mars.
So you've established that Elon Musk's purpose in life is different from mine. So what?
On the other hand, Christianity offers the world real, objective meaning.
No, it doesn't. It offers Christian meaning, which is decidedly different from, say, Muslim meaning, or Hindu meaning, or atheist meaning. And your own Bible implies that it's not objective. It's just what God determines. So it's either subjective to God's determination, or it's subjective to human determination. Honestly, Eric, how many times are you going to lie your ass off in this video?
The Creator of mankind has informed us that we exist on earth for the purpose of choosing, by the grace of God, where we want to live eternally.
Circular reasoning, the trade secret of the apologist.
As we prepare to meet our Maker, He has instructed us to fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man.
Duty of man. What Eric really means is the duty of man subjectively determined by a God that cannot be demonstrated to actually exist, or even rationally believed in without first committing the worst mistakes in human reasoning.
For God will bring every deed into judgment, with every secret thing, whether good or evil.
Sorry, Eric. Thinly veiled biblical threats haven't worked on me since the early 90s. So once again, we see that religious leaders are as equally committed to emotionally manipulating their congregations as they are completely misrepresenting atheism. These tactics are, of course, predatory, feeding on their congregations' fears and justifying their continued ignorance, all the while simultaneously advocating for the submissive acceptance of an abusive relationship, which would probably explain the apologetics manual that they hand out at the meetings. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you did, please like, share, and subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications. And because YouTube's algorithm, sucks, be sure to leave your questions and comments below. Don't forget, April is Autism Acceptance Month. A link on how to support those efforts is in the description. And if you love scary movies, be sure to check out me and my filmmaker friends over at the Week in Horror podcast, now in our 3rd season. All the links you need to become a channel member, nab some official Bridge the Divide gear, or support the podcast are down in the description below. Once again, thank you all very much for your continued support. And as always, be safe, be excellent to each other, and together, we can bridge the divide.